Okay, match. Is it 8?
Yes.
Yes. Now I'm going to say this right off the bat.
Yeah.
Please, Paul Wight, never do another match again.
Oh.
Please don't. And I'll explain this. It was like watching Andre the Giant in the last couple of years of his runs. You know, this
And
absolute.
Sydney Main too.
Yeah, I understand why, because that match, everyone knew the Darby Allin match and CM Punk match was going to be good. And then we got the main event after that. That could have burnt the card. So I get the cooler. That's why the cooler match is in against QT Marshall. I get it. If I was booking that, I would probably have put a cooler match in there as well. I would have.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have been concerned that would have piked. I want to bring the crowd back down a bit and then spike it with the main. Yeah, for the main, you know. If not, have that match maybe earlier in the card. And then maybe being Chicago, people might have walked out, so I can understand why they may put it later in the card. Paul Wight can't move anymore. You can see by his movement. This is a guy at 425 pounds back in the 90s and the late 90s that could do a backflip off the top rope.
Well, he's got a new hip now. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the hip is,
He can't move anymore. You can see by the way he was moving around in the ring, right? And they were selling the hip and everything else, and that kind of thing. But the worst thing with guys like that is letting them work to the point that they can't move anymore, because it reminds me of Andre the Giant. Got to the point that he could hardly move, and he was coming out to the ring with a cane, and then coming out the ring with a walker. And it's nothing worse than seeing somebody that was like that to that. Paul is definitely keep him on commentary, keep him, you know, as an enforcer at a match, stuff like that. But don't let him wrestle again, because you're just downgrading the guy from what he was. And that's with all due respect for Paul Wight. Don't say that because I always liked Paul Wight. You know, I always reckon he has been the replacement for Andre the Giant. Yeah, although Andre is probably not replaceable, but he was the next best thing. You know, so I think
worked the match and how long though as well. I mean, he would it be 18 months more, 2 years, something like that.
If you watch the way he walks and the way he stood in the ring, all his weight was square. He couldn't move. You go 5 or 6 years earlier where he would squat down and tell people to come at him and that kind of thing. He didn't have the body movement, the hip movement, or that anymore. Once you have that kind of operation, QT Marshall ain't heard a lot about him, ain't never seen him. Unfortunately, right? But what I saw of him, I don't mind him. People were bagging him out, a couple of other, podcasts and that. But as a heel, he's quite a good heel. He's another one of these, like MJFs that have been caught up in bullshit storylines, and bullshit, and look like they've been buried and burnt. But he definitely looks like a guy that can move ahead. And then you've got, was it Solo? What was the other guy that came out with him, Anthony?
Agogo,
right? They look pretty impressive too. Especially the one with the frizzy hair that looked like as soon as he ran out to the ring, he reminded me of the Cuban Assassin, which, as you know, is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time.
Yeah, he's good.
He reminded me with the frizzy hair and that, just reminded me of the Cuban Assassin and the chest and that. Yeah, so I liked those guys. I like the idea of Paul Wight, but I don't think he should ever wrestle again. I think he needs to maybe take more of a managing role if he's going to be at ringside, or an enforcer role, or
he could do it. He can do a combination.
Commentary.
He does commentary on one of the weekly shows. I think is it Dynamite, one of those weekly shows. Yeah. He's on commentary there. He could certainly be a good producer.
Yep.
He could do a bit of booking. He could do a bit of managing. There's plenty they could do with him.
But no more. No more.
Although, speaking of which, with Mark Henry being over there,
Mark Henry can still move.
Yeah,
WWE said that he was too old.
He's going to make some sort of comeback.
Well, I'd love to see him versus Miro.
Yeah.
Well, even Comarato or Gogo or whatever, any one of those guys that are big and thick like that, you could like to see him. Yeah. He could have some good tussles over there with some of the bigger fellas.
Because Mark Henry's doing a bit of producing and that for them as well now.
Once again, a guy that
Good
heaps of respect for.
Yeah.
You know, he was in. I think anyone that come out of that the late 90s Attitude Era that was part of that era and worked in that with guys, they're invaluable right now to a wrestling company because that experience and that knowledge is needed. You know, Mark Henry's experience and knowledge is needed. Same as Paul Wright's.
But unfortunately, Paul, just with his surgeries and injuries and that, as you said, he's you don't like to see them like that at the end.
No, you don't.
A bit like the Andre thing. Like, it was absolutely heartbreaking to see him in his last period.
Well, a lot of the old guys, when they've just wrestled for too long, and some of them you don't want to say nothing to, you know, and then, you know,
there's a respect factor. That but
then there's to their legacy of how good they were.
Yeah.
You know, and what the current audience, if nobody ever seen Paul Wight now, they'd say, oh, that big, giant, useless goof.
Yeah, sort of.
You know?
Yeah.
But the reality is, back in the day, the guy for his size was one of the most agile and gifted athletes going around.
Bloody good.
And good, yeah.
Yeah, he was good.
So, you know, I that's for me. That's the negative of that match. I gave it a 5 out of 10. That was all I could honestly give it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, you couldn't do much more.
No. But, you know, QT got his upcomings, his comings, and he lost. And
No, he won't be any worse for that either.
No. Then Paul White's huge.
You know, and semi-main event of their biggest pay-per-view, because that's basically their WrestleMania. So,
but he's a guy I'd like to see them do more with.
Well, him and MJF, I think, have got, as you said, I think they've got good star potential to be really, really big there with a bit of time and the right booking around them.
Oh, yeah, that's right. With
I mean, I don't even know if you'd put them together and make them tag champs or something and let them run there and build them from there, and they then split as a tag team. And
well, look, the roster at AEW is so deep. You've got Brian Pillman's son tagging in there, right? Which is brilliant work. Apparently, I've not actually seen him, but
I've seen a little bit, not much, but good. They're very good.
You've got the depth of talent there is ridiculous at the moment, and once we'll do the Kenny Omega Christian Cage match review, and then we'll talk about a little bit about that, about how deep their roster is and the negativity of how deep the roster is.
Yeah, well, that can also be a problem.
Yeah.